Hey Defenders, welcome back. So in this video we will talk about Wazuh manager clustering and what that means, why it's a benefit for us, and how we can set up load balancing to where we can share the load across servers and also have high availability. But first, time for my shameless plug. If you want to learn more about our company, head on over to opensecure.co. If you would like to hire us for a project, select the Hire Us button at the top of this video. To see firsthand the power of open source technology, take advantage of our interactive demo. Select the demo button and start exploring. Now let's get back to the video. So let's go ahead and jump into it. So currently we've installed the Wazuh agent in the Wazuh manager, right? Our Wazuh agent is feeding logs to our Wazuh manager, and that's working great. However, and since we don't live in a perfect world, this connection could be subject to fail, right? We could all of a sudden lose our Wazuh manager, which is a high risk for us because we are now not able to receive the logs being sent by the agent, and we are now blind to what's going on in our environment, right? So servers can fail, servers and services can fail for a handful of reasons. Some of those I won't get into, but we want to give us the best chance to succeed, right? And how we can do this is Wazuh allows us to cluster our managers together. And then we'll also take it a step further and put them behind a load balancer. And that's especially true as your environment starts to grow as well. So, as we start to configure more Wazuh agents to send logs to our managers, that just puts more and more stress on the Wazuh manager itself, right? And there may come a point where it can no longer handle all the traffic that it's currently receiving. So this will, allowing us to cluster our managers together, will give us high availability, and it also load balance the amount of work that needs to be done across the managers, and also allows us to scale out very easily without any downtime, given the opportunity arises as our network continues to grow. So what we're going to do in this video is, so instead of one Wazuh manager, what we're going to be able to do is the agent now will be able to send logs to two Wazuh managers, and this number can grow infinitely. Your amount of Wazuh managers is just limited to the resources that you have available. And so the architecture that we're going to work with will be in a master and worker node type of architecture. So our original Wazuh manager will convert to the master node, and this new server that we're spinning up and adding to the cluster will be a worker. And what that basically means, and in the previous videos when we installed the Wazuh agent first has to authenticate and get a key from the Wazuh manager, and the master is responsible for that process, as well as coordinating rules, configuration changes, agent removals, and decoders as well. So your master is handling the agent authentication. It's whenever rules are changed, they're done on the master, and the master then pushes them out to the workers, as well as decoder and CVD lists, which we'll get into those later. So a lot of the management stuff, services are done on the master, and then the workers are the ones that are actually now receiving the logs and are evaluating them against the rule set and storing them to FileBeat. So the idea is that, say we have two workers here, so we'll say this is a master, and then these two are workers. I won't waste all this time doing that. And our Wazuh agent is also forwarding logs to this guy. So what this means is now all of a sudden, okay, the agent's sending logs to worker 1, and then all of a sudden worker 1 goes down. Well, the Wazuh agent can now just quickly start forwarding logs to the worker that's still up. And that allows, this clustering allows us to do that. where, you know, previously if our one Wazuh manager were to go down, then we'd be out of luck until we get the manager back online. But now we can have this fault tolerance to where now the Wazuh agent will send logs to this guy. And actually, no more logs are being sent right to the master anymore. They're actually going to the workers there. And we can get back into making that configuration change here. So the bottom right will be our master, and the top right will be our worker. So we've given it the type of master. We are going to ahead and doing a key. So I will add that here. Make that change. Let me go ahead and copy this key here. And throw that guy in there. And the port they'll bind on is 1516. The Wazuh Manager service has a daemon that handles the clustering, and that will listen on port 1516. So if you're clustering managers across environments that there may be a firewall sitting in between, that's a port you may have to open up to ensure connectivity is being made. And now that I'm thinking about that, let me stop firewall D and go ahead and disable this guy. All right. And now we're going to bind to an address. So this is just binding to the local host. Since we are out on the cloud, I'll go ahead and bind to the interface that we're connecting on. Right here. And for this node tag here, we're going to add the master. So on the master itself, right? I mean, it's going to, the master service is running on this IP address. On the worker is where we'll add the same IP address as well, so we can see it. And we'll go ahead and disable to set to yes by default. We'll go ahead and set that to no, so that means it'll run. And now let's do the same to our worker. Oh, and first, actually, we need to install Wazuh again. So let me do that real quick, and I'll be back in a flash. And, all right, so we got that installed. So now we can go ahead and progress. One thing to note is the master and the manager need to be the same version, right? And a good way to grab that is just osec. If you just cat this osecint.conf, you'll get the version number. You want to make sure these two are the same. So if I grab it here as well, you see a version is 4.0.4. Otherwise, you could have compatibility issues. And so now, let's make our changes to this guy, who will serve as the worker. So we'll go ahead and go down into cluster, and we're going to give it the name. The name is Wazuh demo, so this will be the name of our cluster, right? So we could have multiple clusters if we want, but these two will be a part of the same cluster. So for node name, I'm gonna give it, I'll call this worker1. The node type, so the node type we're gonna toggle to be a worker and not a master. We're going to add the key in here. So this is important, right? It needs to be the same key. We don't generate a new one on the worker. We're binding to port 1516. We're gonna go ahead and bind to the address that we want to connect to. I'll make that change here. And now we specify the master IP address, which is this guy here. And we want to change this to no. All right, now let's go ahead and restart our services. And see if we get a connection. And once this is done, we can run this quick script to see. They have a just binary that we can run real quick just to make sure that connection is made between the two. So it looks like they both restarted, so let's run that, and there we go. So that looks good. We see our master, and you can see the name correlates to what we made in our config, and we see our worker. So that looks good. So now that we have, let's get rid of this guy. We have our two managers. However, our agent is still configured to send to our master. And what we want to do is enable the agent to send to the master and the worker, right? And now we also see Python 3 running, which runs this Wazuh clustered Python script here, right? So this is also a good tool to use when troubleshooting. So we have our we have our easy binary that we can call real quick, and we also have to make sure that if this comes back with not the results you were expecting, you can make sure that this Python script is running here that handles that. So now let's go ahead and go back into the Wazuh app, and let's see if we can get some clustering configuration here. Oh, and actually what I think we'll probably need to do is point, oh no, we don't have to. Okay, cool. So now we can go into management and select cluster, and we can see our two nodes, right? Which is nice, so we can verify that that's working correctly. They're clustered together. We can also see what agents are connected. I need to go ahead and spin these guys up. So let me connect to this guy and password of password. Oh, is this not running? Oh, it's not. Oh, so actually, okay, so no, that's good. So now we have these two guys, right? So now we want to have the the agent, this guy, be able to send logs to both. And to be able to, quickly switch between sending its logs from one manager that's no longer working to another. And what we can do is we can take advantage of another open source tool, nginx, and put them between the two and have nginx work as a load balancer for us. So what we'll go ahead and do is spin up an nginx server, and it'll work as a straight pass-through, but will load balance for us as well. So our flow will now go from the Wazuh agent to our nginx server, and then nginx will load balance and forward them to the appropriate manager. And if one manager is no longer responding, nginx will now forward them to the next one. So let's go ahead and jump into doing that. All right, and so we're now in the nginx directory. For those that are unfamiliar with nginx, I highly recommend looking into it. It's another open source tool that can handle, well, it works almost as it can work as a proxy for your application. So you can stand up applications behind it, and it can work as a load balancer. It can work as a web application firewall. You can bundle mod security with it. There's a lot of sophisticated techniques you can implement with nginx, and it's a really powerful tool, especially in the security world, and is free and open source. But I'm going to go ahead and navigate into the configuration confd directory, and this will be included when we start nginx. So this is where we're going to make our configurations to handle our load balancing for Wazuh cluster. So I'll just call it cluster.conf. All these files in here need to end in a cluster.conf, and we'll have a few things going on here. Let me go ahead and bring nginx out to the left, and then go ahead and grab this guy. So our config file is pretty straightforward. And I'll kind of step through the blocks here. So we're calling it a stream, which nginx will just be a straight pass-through, and we'll have our upstream, and we're kind of setting variables here for it. So you can see we specify our upstream master, and then we specify our upstream cluster block. So this will be serve as, so then when we call them down here, where then nginx knows, what's the master and what's the cluster. So for the upstream master, we're going to erase that and put the IP address of our master, which is this guy. And again, as I mentioned earlier in this video, the master handles agent authentication, rule updates, and management services like that. And the agent authentication and registration happens on port 1515, where log forwarding happens on 1514, right? So that's where we're set up here. For the upstream, let's just go ahead and I'll just say workers. And we're using the hash of remote address. And so what the hash algorithm does is calculates hash based on combination of different variables. In our case, ours will be the remote IP address that it's getting the connection from. And what nginx will do is, or the benefit of this is it gives us a session persistence. So meaning that, our agent could be connected to our one worker at one time. All of a sudden this guy blows up and he connects to another worker, and that session is persisted, right? It doesn't have to create a new TCP handshake and establish that and lose. Granted, that's not a lot of time of our Wazuh manager being blind. That happens in the blink of an eye, but this just gives us stronger persistence, and so that's why I like to go with it that way. And so that's set up here. And so what we can also do is also, I've been misleading you guys a little bit. The master can still accept logs from the Wazuh agents. So it does handle all the management capability and agent registration, but it also does have the ability to collect logs as well. So we'll go ahead and configure that here. So our IP address will be that of the manager, and then I'll erase this second guy, and we have our one worker. So I'll include the IP address of this guy. And now we're saying, so the server, so we're spinning up you could think of it kind of as two servers. One is listening on port 1515, and this defaults to TCP. So again, if you have any firewall rules you need to put in place, 1515 and 1514 will be the two you need to do it. Proxy pass, and then we give it, which is just a function within mod security. nginx, and then we're giving it the variable of master, which we've set here, right? And now proxy pass, this needs to change from my cluster to workers, because that's what we've set here, right? And we'll save that off and go ahead and restart nginx. Looks like we got a failure. I wonder if there's maybe a permissions issue or something going on. Stream directive is not allowed in here. Okay, let's do a Google search. So our include, so this is the main configuration file of nginx. This is just all by default, and we're including our, here is where we're including our new config file that we specified here. So stream needs to be on the same level. So we still need to, oh, maybe we can just specify it here. So we'll specify to include that, and let's see. Okay, that restarted. Okay, so the test was okay. Okay, it looks like our mastering process is working. Let's do a netstat real quick to see if the box is actually listening on those ports. And yeah, it is. Okay, good. So we are now listening on those ports, and they're just bound here. So now if I get on our agent, I should be able to run a telnet. Let's get the IP address of this guy. Oh, let's get the IP address of this guy. I should be able to run a telnet to 1515, which would be, which would be the port that's used for registration, and we are. Okay, good. So now the our agent will be now able to register with the manager. So that's good. So now let's configure this guy to connect to the manager, or sorry, to the load balance. We're gonna point, so now what we're gonna do is, expand this out. We will now point our Wazuh agent, instead of pointing it to the IP address of our previous manager, we're actually gonna point it to our nginx server. Right? So what we will now do is, let me go ahead and remove the old one that I had. And let me go ahead and just remove the directory. Okay. And now let's go back into our web UI. We're going to deploy a new agent, CentOS. A664. And I'll go ahead and copy this command. However, we're not going to use this IP address. The Kibana UI, of course, still thinks that we're connecting to just our one manager, which we don't necessarily need to. Or our Kibana UI is pointed to this guy, right, and not our nginx server. So we'll just have to change that. But okay, that should be removed. We'll go ahead and change the IP address to this guy, and we'll go ahead and run it. Alright, so that looks good. And let's tail log file. Okay, it got its key, that's good. Waiting for server reply, which should happen. Oh, right, we need to actually start it, right? It hasn't started yet. Nope. All right, so we have the key, that's good. Now we'll start the agent. All right, and we connected. And as you could probably see for just a second, yeah, so here we're now connecting to our nginx load balancer, right? And we're now, traffic is flowing to either our Wazuh Manager 1 or our Wazuh Manager 2. And now we can, so let's see if we're still tailing that. Let's see what happens if I stop our master. Boom. You can see, okay, now it lost its connection. It's trying connect again, and now it's connected to our second guy. So that's good. Our cluster worked as expected. If I start it back up, we then, of course, see nothing happen because its connection is persistent with our worker, right? So I'll wait for this guy to start back up, our master. And now I'll stop the service on this guy. So we stopped, we closed the connection, right? Because we lost it because the service is no longer running on our worker 1. And now we immediately connected to this guy. So our clustering is working as expected. So that's great. Now, one of these services can fail and we'll still receive our logs, right? One thing, excuse me, of course we didn't do was set up FileBeat on the worker 1 node, which of course we would need to do to actually get the logs into Elasticsearch, right, to be able to view them. So, but that's been covered in my previous videos, so you can go ahead and check that out if you're still unclear on how to do that. But going back into our cluster tag, we can still see kind of what's been going on in terms of health of our cluster. So that's been working great. Of course, we, for those who are still saying, well, wait, what about nginx is now our single point of failure? And that's true. Nginx is now our single point of failure. So what we could do is, instead of pointing our Wazuh agent to a single IP address like what we have here, we could point this to a DNS name, right? And our DNS name could be then set up to serve a handful of nginx servers. So from the Wazuh agent perspective, it'll always point to I'll just say open secure 1 and open secure 1, like that's all it'll know. But from a DNS perspective, we could configure backends, right, to serve this open secure 1 hostname. So if nginx were to go down, or if one of them were to go down, open secure 1 would still be able to be resolved to this other IP address. And that can be done like here. So in their example, they kind of talk about setting up 3 different load balancing kind of services. So we can load balance our load balancer. So we never have that one single point of failure, right? Which is good. You could also maybe use something like Keep Alive. Keep Alive basically works to set a virtual IP address to the 2 hosts. So these IP addresses, or Keep Alive would assign a virtual IP address that, say, for example, is just set on the primary. So one works as a primary. Maybe I can do another video for that. But one works as a primary and one works as a backup. And the VIP is shared between the 2. So if the VIP, or if the interface loses its connection, such as like the server rebooted or died or whatever the case may be, is no longer able to be reached, the VIP will then be reassigned to the second box, to the backup slave, I think is what the terminology that it calls it. And this nginx box will now have the VIP, which the VIP is what we configure for the agent to send its logs to. So that's a little out of the scope of what I wanted to show you guys in this video, but it's definitely something that is worthwhile, especially worth setting up in a production environment where single point of failures just aren't acceptable. So I appreciate you guys taking the time to hang out with me today, and I will see you in the next video. And as always, let me know down below what you liked or disliked about this video, any errors I may have made, as well as recommendations for other open source tools you think I should explore.